Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia, and happy and blessed Palm Sunday to all of you. Um, it has been almost 21 years since the Columbine High School massacre happened near Littleton in the metropolitan area of Denver in Colorado, the United States. And there are continuing controversies these 2 decades later about what really happened on that day. The basic facts are known, of course, and have been known since April 1999, that two senior high school students who were just weeks away from graduating, the 18-year-old Eric Harris and the 17-year-old Dylan Klebold, who had been close friends for several years, walked into the high school wearing trench coats and like paramilitary style gear, um, carrying with them ammunition, and also in a duffel bag, one of them brought homemade bombs that were set to explode, according to their plan, in the Columbine High School's cafeteria that, at least back in 1999, was called the Commons, and exactly strategically at the lunchtime between 11 a.m. and 12 noon, so as to kill as many hundreds of students and as many tens of teachers and other faculty members as possible. By God's wonderful grace, only 13 people, including 12 students and one teacher, were killed before the killers took their own lives. And there were many heroic actions on that day. There were teachers and students who saved many lives by locking themselves in the classrooms, by switching off the lights. And then there were those students who tried to save David Sanders, who was a computer science and business teacher at the school and also a sports coach, who unfortunately, after having led hundreds of students to safety from the library, was confronted by the gunmen who shot him fatally, and he gradually then bled to death that afternoon before the police teams were able to enter the high school and find the survivors, and before he could have been taken to a hospital and given a blood transfusion to save his life. And among the 13 victims, there were at least 3, possibly 4, born-again Christians. Cassie Bernal, who had become a Christian just over 2 years earlier in March 1997 in a Christian youth retreat during one weekend. Then Rachel Scott, who had been a Christian at least for some, if not several years, and had grown up in a Christian family, although her parents tragically had got divorced around 1989, if I remember correctly, and who had also kept a deeply spiritual journal, and had just under 1 year before the massacre on May the 2nd, 1998, written in her diary, "This will be my last year, Lord. I've gotten what I can, thank you." Then John Tomlin, who rarely is mentioned, even though he was also active in his congregation's youth group. He was a professing born-again Christian and even left his Bible open inside his car's windshield in the hope that people passing by would read at least some verses of it. And then possibly Isaiah Scholes, who was the only African American student to be killed in the massacre. He also attended a local Christian youth group. And perhaps Lauren Townsend, who was supposed to graduate that June in 1999. Well, we don't know exactly. So, at least according to the initial reports, there were targeted groups, born-again Christians who professed their faith. Then there were those so-called jocks, who were skilled and popular athletes at the school, and then certain ethnic minority members, although there there were so few ethnic minority victims in the massacre. One Hispanic American, Kyle Velasquez, who was a special education student, and Isaiah Scholes, the only African American victim, that if they had such detailed plans, at least those plans largely failed. And then they claimed that they supposedly had no option but to commit the massacre in their so-called basement videotapes that were used in the police investigation into the massacre, and that have even been transcribed. It's possible, I think, still to Google them online. I did that in April 2019 to commemorate the 20th massacre anniversary of Columbine. Probably they since have been destroyed, or at least the police officers have them under seal or something like that. And one of the four parents of those two murderous students who killed themselves, suicidal students as well, Sue Klebold, Dylan Klebold's mother, has even written a book that was published in 2016 as A Mother's Reckoning. The main title was it Coming to Terms with the Columbine High School Massacre or something like that. And she has given numerous interviews, and given her background in education and in assisting disabled students, she has focused heavily on the mental health issues aspects of this massacre. But then the two large controversies have to do with two of the most prominent born-again Christian victims of the Columbine High School Massacre, Rachel Scott and Cassie Bernal, because according to initial reports, and both Rachel Scott's father, Darrell Scott, and Cassie Bernal's mother, Misty Bernal, strongly believed, at least back in 1999, that their daughters were indeed asked by their executioners, as it were, if they believed in God, and after saying yes, they were shot to death. According to later police investigations, probably neither one of the two girls was asked if they believed in God. This does not mean, of course, that at least one of them, Rachel Scott, could not have been targeted because of her open Christian beliefs, because she had participated in at least one course. That course was about video making, video filming with the two murderous boys, and had witnessed to them about Jesus Christ, hoping to persuade them to repent of their sins and give their lives to Jesus Christ, but they had mockingly and blasphemously rejected her testimony. And on one of the basement tapes, they actually mocked Cassie Bernal and another Christian girl for openly witnessing about Jesus. Whether they knew Cassie Bernal to be a born-again Christian or not, I don't know. Based on Cassie Bernal's mother's, Misty Bernal's, brief biography of her daughter, she said, yes, the unlikely martyrdom of Cassie Bernal. Cassie did not so openly, so verbally witness about Jesus Christ, but tried to witness about Jesus Christ by behaving righteously towards her fellow students. But Rachel was more open about her faith. Anyway, an interesting interview is available, or actually, there are two versions of it, at least on the internet, of Emily Wyant. Yeah, more actually, but I'm just including two of them in this video. Emily Wyant, who was like a waving acquaintance of Cassie Bernal. In other words, they waved to each other, said hi to each other, but were not close friends, who happened to be under the same table as Cassie, and who actually saw and heard what happened. So the claim that Cassie was asked by her executioner, who actually was Eric Harris, whether she believed in God, and after she had replied yes, she had then been shot dead. That claim was based on the testimony of one of the survivors, Craig Scott, um, who is the slain Rachel Scott's brother and has participated with Rachel's older sister, or one of them, in the high school anti-bullying program known as Rachel's Challenge, anti-bullying and pro-friendship program, where no one is left alone to brood over his or her personal hurts, but um, compassionate fellow students try to encourage and be friendly towards and comfort every single student who may be suffering over, for example, broken relationship, his or her broken family, the accidental death of one or more loved ones, or just being ostracized by other students, which is all too common at schools, not just in the United States, but also throughout the world, especially the Western countries, meaning North American and European countries, Australia and New Zealand. Well, in any case, Emily Wyant gave an interesting interview in 2010 that was then referenced by the pro-Republican New Republic magazine in 2015, interestingly enough, to criticize one of the prospective candidates for the Republican presidential nomination in 2016, the former US Senator Rick Santorum of Pennsylvania, who said that 16 years earlier, back in 1999, this student had paid her testimony about Jesus Christ with her life. So let's look at the New Republic's article first. Dated, written by Dave Cullen, who I think has written a book about the Columbine High School massacre, published on September 17th, 2015, and entitled, "Why Does the Columbine Myth About Martyr, in quotation marks, Cassie Bernal Persist?" Cassie Bernal, a 17-year-old killed in the massacre, was an international sensation for about 5 months, meaning from about April to September 1999. Cassie rallies with fevered altar calls erupted around the globe, but what the writer fails to mention is that thousands and thousands of people have got saved in these youth services and revival meetings recalling the Columbine massacre, and that the born-again Christian survivors of the massacre, like Craig Scott and Crystal Woodman Miller, have encouraged many people, especially teenagers and young adults, to commit their lives to Jesus Christ. The biggest occurred at the Silverdome in Michigan, where Weekly Standard writer Joseph Bottum, spelled Bottum, described how 73,000 teenagers wept along with sermon after sermon on her death. Cassie's mother, Misty Bernal, wrote a bestseller, She Said Yes, The Unlikely Martyrdom of Cassie Bernal. The story was reported virtually everywhere by every legitimate outlet. And the author adds, I cringe to admit that I repeated the story in Salon that spring. All the while, detectives and FBI agents leading the massive police investigation fretted over or worried over how to break it, in other words, and reveal it or announce it to the public, that it was all a huge misunderstanding. Well, Craig Scott did not lie deliberately. He was genuinely mistaken as to the identity of the girl who replied to the gunman's question, or one gunman's question, do you believe in God? And that girl actually was and is Valine Schnurr, now a young woman, of course, or actually approaching middle age already. She was shot multiple times in the library. Miraculously, she survived. And when the gunman, I think in her case it was Dylan Klebold, asked, in agony, she cried out, dear God, or oh my God, don't let me die. And then Dylan Klebold, who actually had been raised at a Lutheran church, but had turned to atheism and occultism and neo-Nazism and whatever, as if he was startled by uh, Valin's comments. Uh, Repeated, God? Do you believe in God? Valin Schnur replied, yes, I do. And then he asked, why? Or why do you believe in God? She replied, because I believe and my parents brought me up that way. And amazingly, Dylan Klebold walked away, maybe to reload more ammunition. And I think by the time he came back, Valinchner had already passed out because of her massive blood loss, and maybe either he took her for dead already, or he thought that she would die in any case of her massive injuries. She didn't, miraculously. And then Eric Harris was the gunman who shot, for example, Cassie Bernal dead. So in September 1999, Mr. Cullen broke the news in Salon. The Rocky Mountain News, after all, Littleton, like the greater metropolitan area of Denver, is located on or near the Rocky Mountains, that massive mountain range that starts in Western Canada and then continues through Western United States, and then on the Mexican side, or at the latest in South America, then changes into the Andes mountain range. The Rocky Mountain News, which had been investigating the story for months, followed the next day with a much more detailed account. Emily Wyant, the little girl under the table with Cassie when it happened, came forward. Virtually every major media organization followed. Colin continues, I don't begrudge anyone telling the myth in 1999. Everyone believed it, or many people did in any case. And in the end, there was no conspiracy or intent to mislead. We might ask, standing, contrary to the current US president's 10,000 plus times when he has intentionally lied to or misled the public, especially in the United States. One traumatized young boy, meaning Craig Scott, made a simple mistake and the story spread like fire. But it was thoroughly debunked 16 years ago, so why is Rick Santorum still misleading the public now? Well, probably because of his strong Christian beliefs or something like that. Like most of the Columbine myths, the martyr story gained traction because it was based on a kernel or a grain of truth. A young girl did profess her faith in God at gunpoint, but she lived to tell about it. Her name is Valine Schnur. 10 years later, I sorted through the confusion again in my book, Columbine. Val, meaning Valine, was shot before her exchange about God. Dylan pointed his shotgun under her table and fired several rapid bursts, killing Lauren Townsend and injuring Val and another girl. Val was riddled with gunshot pellets up and down her arms and torso, torso meaning main part of the body. Dylan walked away. Val dropped to her knees, then her hands. Blood was streaming out of 34 separate wounds. Oh my God, don't let me die, she prayed. Dylan turned around. This was too rich, or should I rephrase it, too much, because he had turned to atheism, occultism, and neo-Nazism, and he blasphemed against God and mocked the Christians. God, do you believe in God? She wavered. Maybe she should keep her mouth shut. No, she would rather say it. Yes, I believe in God. Why? Because I believe and my parents brought me up that way. Dylan reloaded, but something distracted him. He walked off. Val crawled for shelter. Once she made it out, Val was loaded into an ambulance, transported to St. Anthony's, and rushed into surgery. Her parents, Mark and Shari, were waiting for her when she came to. In other words, regained consciousness. Val started blurting out what had happened almost immediately. She made a full recovery, and her story never varied. Numerous witnesses corroborated her account. Val's table was on the inside edge of the library near the hallway. A boy named Craig, meaning Craig Scott, hiding under a table in the middle of the library, heard the exchange and for some reason thought it was Cassie. And he was able to run away from the library with a few other two students, including Crystal Woodman Miller. He told friends, and the story took off. By Sunday, I think the massacre happened on Tuesday. So if that, yeah, yes. So that would then mean April the 25th. Yes, because Cassie Bernal was briefly videotaped on Sunday evening, April the 18th, 1999, after someone had asked her what it meant to her to be a Christian. And that brief videotape attached to tape about the high school massacre, and then um, Cassie's song, Whatever It Takes, I'll Be One Who Lives in the Fresh Newness of Life of Those who are alive from the dead. Whatever it takes. Some Christian group may either cry or Jars of Clay sings it. So by Sunday, April the 25th, 1999, it was being reported by major media and proclaimed from pulpits around the world. In reality, Cassie was hiding under a table at the far edge of the library by the windows. Just one girl was under the table with her, Emily Wyant. They had wisely chosen to face each other so they could stay in contact, but look past each other to get a 360-degree view of the room, at least at floor height. Emily saw a kid, well, meaning a student, near the counter jump or go down. The killers walked around a lot, taunting and shooting, and Emily got a good look at them. She had never noticed them before she was a sophomore, but was sure she could pick them out again if she ever saw them again. The girls whispered back and forth, dear God, why is this happening? Cassie asked. She was praying quietly. I just want to go home. I know, Emily answered. We all want to get out of here. Between exchanges, Cassie prayed very quietly. So this, of course, means that she was a true Christian. She turned to God for help. Eric and Dylan passed by several times, but Emily never expected one of them to come under the table and shoot. Eric stopped at their table at Cassie's, and Emily could see his legs and his boots pointing directly at the right side of Cassie's face. Cassie didn't turn. Emily didn't have to. She was facing perpendicular to Eric's stance, so she could look straight at Cassie and see Eric just to her left at the same time. Eric slammed his hand on the table, then squatted halfway down for a look. Peekaboo, he said. Eric poked his shotgun under the table rim as he came down. He didn't pause long or even stoop down far enough for Emily to see his face. She saw the sawed-off gun barrel. The opening was huge. She looked into Cassie's brown eyes. Cassie was still praying. There was no time for words between them. Eric shot Cassie in the head. Everything was muffled then. The blast was so loud it temporarily blew out most of Emily's hearing. The fire alarm had been unbearably loud, but now she could barely hear it. She could see the light flashing out in the hallway. Eric's legs turned. Bree Pasquale was sitting there, right out in the open a few steps away beside the next table over. It had been jammed with students. When she got there, she couldn't fit, so she sat down next to it on the floor. Bree was a bit farther from Cassie than Emily, the next closest person, but she had a wider view. She had also seen Eric walk up with a shotgun in his right hand, slap Cassie's tabletop twice with his left, and say peekaboo. He squatted down, balancing on the balls of his feet, still holding onto the tabletop with his free hand. Cassie looked desperate, holding her hands up against the sides of her face. Eric poked the shotgun under and fired, not a word. Part-time visual arts teacher Patty Nielsen's famous 911 call from the library allowed the investigators to reconstruct most of the carnage moment by moment. Nielsen eventually dropped the phone to take cover, but it continued recording, and the FBI lab enhanced the tape. Both eyewitnesses to Cassie's death, Emily and Bree, have been unequivocal about what happened right in front of them, as lead investigator Kate Batten. But something interesting happened once the truth came to light. Cassie's church didn't back down. Hannah Rosen did a wonderfully thorough dissection of the rise and fall of the myth in the Washington Post. Reverend Dave McPherson, youth pastor at Cassie's congregation at West Bowles Community Church, which is a non-denominational evangelical congregation in or near Littleton, told Hannah, "You will never change the story of Cassie. The church is going to stick to the martyr story. You can say it didn't happen that way, but the church won't accept it." Well, too bad. He didn't mean just his church. He meant the worldwide evangelical community. And to a large extent, he was right. This widespread debunking was met with widespread denial. She Said Yes was reissued in several formats and sold over 1 million copies, and I think it's still available as a PDF file. A vast array of websites sprang up to defend the erroneous story. Too many people had found too much value spiritually or financially in the myth to simply let it die, or were too passionate to believe that it actually is true. Which explains why 16 years later, a presidential candidate is still repeating it. Dave Cullen is the author of Columbine and the then upcoming Soldiers First. And then Burn and Rave at Close of Day.com post. This post was written on, I think, sometime in 2015. I'm not sure about the date. Just brief excerpts. It comes from the book of interviews Stand By Me by Julie Towers. Took place in 2010. And Julie Towers had met Emily Wyant in or around 2005, shortly after starting to work as a dental hygienist in Fort Collins, Colorado, because the company hired Emily Wyant, a new dental hygienist, just starting her career. And they quickly befriended each other. And Emily told in her interview that it was what she wanted people to know. And she had been absent the previous day on Monday, or April the 19th, 1999. So she was not prepared for the science, meaning either biology, chemistry, or physics test that they were going to take that day, and had never been to the library before that day. Quite amazing, given the fact that she was a sophomore, not a freshman. So they had a waving acquaintance. Emily Wyant would wave to Cassie Bernal in the hallway. Everyone else in the library was either older or then unknown to her. Cassie and Emily said to each other, "I just want to go home." And then together they prayed quietly. The shooter, meaning Eric Harris, did not say anything to them except peekaboo. Then one of the shotguns came under the table and Cassie was gone. And then there was a miracle because his sawed-off shotgun jerked backwards. Eric broke his nose, so he was off balance after he killed Cassie. He was distracted. And, well, of course, God above all was merciful to Emily and let her live. But humanly speaking, that miracle saved Emily's life. And Brie Pasquale was also saved or spared that day. And at the time, in 1999, Emily's mother was working 2 minutes away. So someone gave her a ride, and then she ran up to her mother's office, and her mother was positively surprised saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're here. Thank goodness." And you can close the door then. If that, okay. Yes. So for maybe a month, Emily went to counseling daily. Um, and then occasionally she has seen the counselor. Her parents, her extended family, and teachers were wonderful. Also, her friends in her church's youth group and her choir teachers also gave strength. And her science teacher, who had sent her to the library that fateful day, always checked in to see how she was doing. And after the then recent Deer Creek shooting in Littleton, so was it in 2009 or 2010, counselors were saying that it's important that students get back to school right away, back into a routine. However, returning to school is very hard, understandably, for Emily. They closed Columbine temporarily, and then they went to Chatfield until the end of May, and that was frightening. Every single little sound that she heard made her think, oh my gosh, it's going to happen again. Who's out in the hall? Are they coming in here? And she was hypersensitive to every noise. So just that probably neither Cassie Bernal nor Rachel Scott was asked about their faith in God does not, of course, mean that they weren't real Christians. Both of them were. There's ample evidence to support that. But this is an example of how an innocent mistake can then blossom into a major story in many evangelistic sermons. And it's difficult for some pastors and evangelists and preachers and maybe even missionaries to retract the story that, yes, Cassie actually was praying quietly under the table, but her killer didn't ask her if she believed in God. Yes, in no uncertain terms, Rachel had witnessed to the killers, but they didn't ask her if she believed in God. Well, of course, it would have been a redundant question because they very well knew that she did, and not only in God, but in Jesus Christ as her personal Savior. So have a blessed Easter time, all of you.